Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is my colleague, Forbes staff writer, Zach Everson. Zach, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, Brittany. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. You and your entire team are estimating the net worths of Supreme Court justices. Today, we are talking about Justice Clarence Thomas. But before you reveal the big number, I want you to walk it back a little bit. Take us to the very beginning, because in your story, you describe the justice as a, quote, genuine American success story. So tell us that story.
Yeah, I mean, he's really a rags to riches story, and obviously he is a very controversial justice. But I mean, this is objectively, it's a very impressive life story. He was born in 1948 in what he described as a shanty. It was his great aunt's house. There was no indoor plumbing. There was only one electric light. He moved. The house burned down. He moved to Savannah to live with his mom in what he called urban squalor. His life really took a turn when his mother dropped him and his brother off at his grandparents' house. They really stressed his education, spent the money, saved up and spent money to send him to Catholic school. So there's a lot of hard work that goes in there. But as you go through his memoir, he's also quick to point out that there's a lot of assistance that helped him along the way. Namely, his grandparents helping him out along that way. John Danforth, who was the Attorney General of Missouri, really helped him out a few times. But it is miraculous thinking about that, how this person born in a shanty in Georgia could be one of the highest ranking jurists in the United States.
It's really a story about the American dream, and an interesting thing that you pointed out just now, you also pointed it out in your story, is that he did receive a lot of help along the way. One of my favorite tidbits was from Ralph Nader himself, and this help from a lot of people along the way was in the ballpark of thousands of dollars. So can you talk about that for us a little bit?
Sure. The Nader one specifically, and this also came out of Thomas's memoir, and he pointed out the irony in this, is that Thomas was a bit short in paying for his son Jamal's tuition and needed some money, didn't have any credit, was pretty much maxed out, and all of a sudden got a notice in the mail that his Fiat had been recalled, and it was a recall that had been instigated by Ralph Nader's progressive policies, and that got Thomas a check for $2,000 that he was then able to sign over to pay for his son's tuition. But Thomas also talks about regularly having to borrow money from friends, small amounts that he would take. When cash got a little tight, he'd pay them back, only to have to borrow it again at the end of the month. Student loans, he had student loans all the way until he was on the Supreme Court, he says. And he talks about, it seems like he spent a little bit recklessly some places as well. He had a Camaro at one point, he had a Corvette. He and his first wife bought a house in St. Louis where the mortgage payments were about double what they'd been paying previously in rent. So there's a bit of that as well.
And when he was borrowing money from friends, from others, was he returning this money?
Yeah, I mean, best we can tell, he's paid off his debts. He has a house right now in suburban DC in the Virginia area. Nice setback away from prying eyes, and we valued it about $1.4 million. He owes $600,000 on it due to mortgage, the last mortgage we could find. But I mean, there's no signs that he hasn't paid back any of this. It's other than the outstanding mortgage.
And at one point, he did note, or you noted that he said in his memoir that he was on the brink of financial ruin. So when did his tides turn?
He said that several times, actually, how he he regularly pointed out how difficult his life was, even as he was, in the 80s when he was working as a appointee of President Reagan. I mean, that obviously was a big turning point for him when President Reagan appointed him to the Department of Education, and then the following year put him in as the head of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So he had a pretty high-ranking job, but even then he was had some difficulty financially. It sounds like it got better around the time that he met Virginia Lamp, who is his wife, famously Ginny Thomas, who worked to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. He mentioned there that they were looking to buy a house for the two of them and his son from his first marriage, Jamal, and they weren't sure if they could afford it, so they went to the house the night before. It was a construction site. They went before and prayed about it, And their prayers were answered when Ginny Lamp's family came through and gave them a little bit of money they were able to use on the mortgage. So from that point on through the rest of his memoir, which covers up until his appointment on the Supreme Court, he doesn't appear to mention any financial difficulties. Although clearly, from other reporting, it's clear that he has had some. He's not making as much as he would have liked to for the rest of his career.
So let's talk about how much he's worth present day. He is the epitome of the American dream, really a rags to riches story. You do note in your reporting that at one point he couldn't even afford his bus fare, so he was walking to work. Now he's a multimillionaire. How much is he worth?
He is worth $4 million, which it's a cozy nest egg. Is it going to afford travel on, super luxe yachts and private airplanes? No. Most of that money is tied up in his pension. Federal judges are, if they've served a certain year on the bench and they reach a certain age, they're able to collect their annual salary for the rest of their lives. And Clarence Thomas has met both of those qualifications. So most of his money is the result of what we value his pension at and also his home. So it's really tied up in those two areas. In his disclosures, he did mention an IRA and some other smaller investments, but it's not like this is liquid money that he could go out and spend. So it's comfortable. He's doing all right. It is a far path from where he started off with. It's impressive. On the other hand, he's one of the top legal minds of the United States in terms of position, and he's only making $285,000 a year. If he was a partner at a law firm, he'd be making easily $4 million a year, let alone that being his net worth. So, that is an interesting conversation that I've seen some people raise in response to this article is, maybe we should look at paying these people more and then just not allowing them anything in terms of investments, book deals, free trips, teaching gigs, any of that kind of stuff. And it's an interesting conversation.
And that brings up some ethical concerns that Justice Thomas really found himself embroiled in 2023. He had a tough year in 2023. Can you walk us through it?
Yeah, ProPublica had a whole series of reporting out there that he was getting free trips from Harlan Crow, who's a Texas millionaire. Subsequent articles pointed out that Crow was actually his mother's landlord, bought a bunch of homes around where Thomas grew up. He paid for Thomas's son's tuition. Subsequent reporting in the New York Times pointed out that Thomas's famous RV that he loves to talk about, how he's a man of the people driving around and sleeping at Walmart parking lots, was actually paid for by a wealthy friend, and that Thomas, a subsequent Senate inquiry showed that Thomas didn't pay back the entire loan and may not have paid back any of it. So yeah, there's a lot of questions about who Clarence Thomas's friends are, why they are so generous to him, and what they might be getting in return for it.
You wrapped that up perfectly in your report. You write this: 50 years on the government payroll hasn't provided Thomas enough money to buy a yacht or airplane. Fortunately for him, he has rich friends. So when your team was looking at all the other justices, do his ethical concerns here raise the most red flags? Do the other justices have these types of rich friends that help them out like Thomas seems to have?
That's a great question. We don't know. That's part of this came about only because of ProPublica's reporting. Have we seen evidence that the other justices do? They reported that Justice Alito went on a fishing trip with a very wealthy friend. There's been some other signs, but we don't have anything nearly as tangible as with Justice Thomas and the reporting that's come out from ProPublica and the New York Times on that.
I do now want to transition to his wife. You mentioned her, Ginny Thomas. She was embroiled in January 6th in efforts to overturn the election, and she has a really lucrative career as a lobbyist. How does that factor into Justice Thomas's net worth?
Well, when they disclose these things, they have to disclose joint accounts. Her family has an LLC that is involved with land leasing in Nebraska. The Washington Post has reported that's worth about $500,000 to $1 million, and it kicks off about $500,000 to $100,000 in annual income. So that certainly helps. And we don't have a list of who those clients are, who's leasing that land from them. We don't know exactly who is paying Liberty Consulting. I did go out. They have an address for Liberty Consulting. I went to go check it out. It is a box at a UPS store. It is one of the larger boxes at the UPS store. It is not one of the smaller ones. So, it sounds like she does get bigger pieces of mail than other people. Mine at the UPS store is small. So yeah, there's just really a lot of questions about her and in their finances again. Like, how mingled are they? She's donated over $20,000 to Republican candidates, which she's entitled to do. It's legal, but I think it's also the public's right to know is, are those coming from a joint checking account? Like, is that Justice Thomas's money as well that's going to those candidates?
I was just about to ask you about that 20 grand because that is an interesting point. She's donating it, but where's that money coming from? Is this normal for the couple of a Supreme Court justice to do?
No, we've seen a few other examples of it out there, but I think, if I remember correctly, Justice Roberts' wife maybe have made some, and I think Stephen Breyer's wife may have made some. Don't totally recall those names correctly, but I do know it's happened before. But I think the extent of hers has been interesting, and it's continued after it was originally reported. The most recent batch of FEC filings showed that she made another $500 donation to the Fairfax County, Virginia Republican Committee within the last few months. So she's not showing any signs of stopping this either. And most of the donations actually have come in recent years. It's not like it was something she was doing in the early 90s right after he was put on the bench, although she did make, I believe it was one early donation to the RNC then. A lot of it's come more recently.
Zach, you did mention earlier that Justice Thomas's nest egg of $4 million was comfortable. So I'm curious, how does this stack up to the other justices?
So it is going to be, by the time we've published all of these valuations, it's going to be towards the lower end. We haven't published all of them yet. My colleague Kyle Mullins has published, I think it's 3 so far, where he's looked at John Roberts, Sonia Sotomayor, and Brett Kavanaugh. And Roberts is the highest. He's worth about $25 million. Sotomayor, we have it around $5 million. And Kavanaugh is $3 million. Now, those two are also both much younger than Thomas. So, he's had more time to assemble, to collect some money as well. But I think by the time the other ones come in, we will see that they're higher. But that also comes from, he spent 48 years of his 50-year career in government service. Working for the government is not really going to make you rich.
Well, Zach Everson, thank you so much for your reporting. I look forward to you joining me again.
Looking forward to it, Brittany. Thanks.